Hi, class. Okay, we're back now, and I'm going to continue my discussion about nonverbal communication. This is Professor Barry Brennan, and I'm here with my interpersonal communication class. Here we go, folks. Okay, so we left off talking about that's exactly where we left off, right there. Okay, awesome. Okay, influences on nonverbal communication. What are we talking about there? Well, culture. And I kind of referenced that earlier. But culture is a major influence on nonverbal communication. In terms of when we talked about culture in the other lectures, um, low context versus high context, we talked about collectivism versus individualism, and so much, especially the low context versus high context. In high context cultures, the emphasis on nonverbal communication is very high. Uh, it means that there's an emphasis on how things are done, on ritual, on behavior, on the dress, on context. Those are more highly valued and communicate to people more, like are treated with more, how do I put it, with more importance, with more power than in cultures that are low context, when the focus is on the word, on verbal communication. That's what drives the understanding of things. So keeping that in mind, in cultures like, let's think of Japanese cultures, there's a lot of ritual in Japanese culture. There's a lot of ritual in Hmong culture, right? And what I know about the Hmong New Year. There's less ritual, and there are some rituals, but there's ritual in religion, but there's less ritual in like white Anglo culture, more about the word, especially in white American culture, or even American culture, in general, just because of us being an individualistic country, and we're about free speech, and a lot of it has to do with what we say. So putting that all in context, right? A nonverbal communication. So one thing I want to look at is how we treat time. Also, the study of time is actually the study of chronemics. It's a great word for you, chronemics. Chronics, chronemics. Yeah, it's a great word to know. That's a study of the body clock, but this is how we look. How do we look at time? So in cultures that are monochronic, being punctual is very important. We live in a culture where being monochronic is very important, right? Punctuality, keeping on time, being on schedule. If you're late a few minutes, in our culture, we are expected to apologize for being late. Okay, now if you live in a polychronic culture and you're supposed to be there at 3, but you arrive at 3:30, you don't in that culture that time is like a variable, right? Time, there's a flexibility in, like, maybe 15 minutes before and 15 minutes after, or whatever. I don't know, honestly, because I don't live in a culture like that. I know, and I've heard, like, when I was married to my husband who's Mexican, like, I've heard Mexican time, uh, in terms of how long it takes to, like, get somewhere or showing up, or, I don't know if that's true or not because I'm not Mexican, but I've heard that. So there are, like, examples of cultures where, and I know that about Latin America, that their emphasis is less on being on time and more flexibility, and the focus is on being together, not on just like being on time and punctuality and tasks and schedules. It's about being together, right? So there's another way to think about time, but monochronic versus polychronic. Okay. Cultural differences in perception. Now, this little graph right here, not graph, table, data table, is interesting, okay? I think there's more that could be said about this, but this is the table that I have that I picked up from literature that I have. But in general, right, behavior of, if you're a Latina or a Latino, avoiding direct eye contact communicates attentiveness and respect, okay, if you're part of that group. So what this chart looks at is in-group perception, meaning if you're part of that group, versus out-group perception, you're not part of that group, okay? Now, honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, I think this point of view looks from the white perspective versus the other perspective. So I'm going to put that out there right now because I think that's exactly what it looks at. So if you're white, you might perceive the lack of avoiding direct eye contact as inattentive, or and you prefer direct eye contact. Okay. If you perceive an African American or a black person, a black individual, that is the behavior might be, now the word is aggressively disagreeing, just disagreeing, and maybe aggressively meaning passionate, right? Passionately disagreeing. If you're part of that group, if you're black or African American, however you define yourself, you might see that as acceptable, right? And that if you're not part of that group, you might see that as inappropriate, right? And you might be afraid of it if your group doesn't communicate in that way, okay? Native American behavior of silence, being quiet, is actually for a Native American or Indigenous person a sign of respect. Could be thoughtfulness, could be a sign of uncertainty. A person not in that group might see that as a sign of boredom or lack of interest, right? The gender piece in this, touching or holding hands between same-sex friends. If you're not part of a group that accepts that behavior or a culture that accepts that behavior, then it can be seen as inappropriate or not acceptable, right? That's like has to do with our opinions or beliefs about masculinity and femininity, and what's crossing those lines in terms of touch. We're going to talk about touch as well. So this chart is helpful, but it doesn't give the whole picture. I think that's what I really wanted to bring your attention to. It gives a part of the picture, but it doesn't give the whole picture. Okay, moving on. Gender. Now, this research is very much across like lines of all women of what they've studied. It's not limited to just white Anglo middle class women, how often research is done. This is like women, like a diverse group of women in terms of how women as a gender respond nonverbally in comparison to men. So women are more likely to smile more. Why do you think that is? I think women, we've been taught to be more comfortable with our emotions or more aware of them. I'm not really sure, but women are known to smile more. They use more facial expression. And I can attest to that. I had stepsons and they would never smile when we took a picture. I even see like young men or middle-aged men, they won't smile during a picture. What is that? Okay, I don't know what that means, but it's interesting, right? And women use more facial expressions. Well, like you'll see more going on with our face. Think about it. Look around. If you live with women, check it out. There's a lot of truth to that. We are more willing to use our bodies to express ourselves. We might use our hands more, right? We're more like in our body and we're comfortable with it. I wonder how much that has to do if men aren't doing that. It's that men have been socialized not to show their feelings. And a lot of it has to do with, in that, like from a long, long time ago, about survival, right? Men had to survive. They had to survive for their families. They couldn't show their enemy like what was going on. So this whole thing has been socialized. I mean, That's not what's happening today. Especially live in this country, that's what's happening today, that you don't have to do that. But it's been seen as like showing emotions or showing anything kind of emotion, non-verbally showing emotion is a sign of weakness, right? So that can even go for women in certain cultures and growing up in certain families. So that's something to keep in context as we look at this. But there's a health association, which is not going to talk about here, but that's what makes women healthier, probably live longer than men, is this able to express themselves. They're not holding stuff in. Okay, what else do we know? Women are more likely to touch, we're comfortable touching other people, even people we don't know, right? That's just we are groomed to be like that. We're comfortable making physical contact. We're likely to stand closer to someone else when we're talking to them. And finally, we usually make more eye contact. Okay, interesting. So when you take all this together, this is what men love about women, right? But when you take all this together, you realize that that part of the relational piece, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, how much men depend upon that for the woman. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's interesting stuff of how we're socialized. I think that this is opening up. I think that men are becoming more expressive, but I think it's still going to take time for men to do that. And women will keep being who they are. Okay. Next, let's go on to the next one. Body movement. So, body movement also a form of nonverbal communication. So, body movement is really interesting. This week you have that task to do your superhero stance, right? And I'm wondering how you're all doing that and what it's feeling like to you. But body movement is really about how people move in their body, is how comfortable they are in their body. Now, I always wanted to be, when I was young, one of those people that was really comfortable in their body, and I was not. I wore like clothes that were too big for me, so you couldn't see my body. I was really uncomfortable in my body. And I had an eating disorder. I don't think I've shared that in the class yet, but I had an eating disorder as well. So today, I'm so much more comfortable in my body, but I think that's age and maybe a little wisdom, but just getting past wanting to be perfect, right? But it says something how someone's relationship to their body shows up in how they stand, how they sit, whether they sit like how they sit, if they cross their arms. It's all about how do you live in your body, whether you're limber or not limber, whether you're stiff. If you're a person that's really heady, you don't live in your body. You're like always up here and probably don't even notice what's going on in your body. So body orientation, how people move, says a lot about their relationship with their self and how they feel about themselves. All right, we are actually going to stop there because I have a lot to say about the next slide, and we'll continue on with body movement. Next, we're going to look at posture, and I'll see you in just a few moments. Bye.